So please join me in welcoming Merrick Furst.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks. Glenn is a little bit modest about it. So everything I'm going to tell you about is it's not just a product of my work, but there are a lot of people in the community. Glenn, Bev, who's not from the community but might as well be, Sig, Raj was somewhere. So the many people in this room, I'm sure I'm overlooking you because I'm nervous and I'm standing in front of you and I'll run out of time. But I want to say thank you. So this is everything I'm going to share with you. You should view it as, okay, I'm trying to make it happen, but there are a lot of people that are involved in this also. I guess first we should have a vote on the location of the next Super Bowl. Is that the 2017? So we're the only people in the building not having that vote. So I guess. So this is what Flashpoint looks like when it's in session. We have quite a few people in the room that are Flashpoint founders, and they can share with you what it's like to be there and to. I'm sure they're happy to network with you and share with you what some of them are previous in previous cohorts, some of them current cohorts. What I wanted to talk to you about was what we've learned a bit about how to do startups and what that means. And if you don't mind, we only have a limited amount of time, so I'll just go sort of quickly through it. And I was told you're not allowed to ask questions, so that means I can't get anything wrong. That's perfect. Just for fun, just so you'll have a sense of what's going on, just sort of these are the bona fides of Flashpoint. These are companies that didn't really exist before Flashpoint showed up, so many of them you'll know about in the community. Ionic Security showed up. It was a single founder who had an idea for a Facebook app. It's now a company worth well over $100 million that's raised money from Kleiner Perkins and Andreessen Horowitz. Ecom Hub is a founder who's was a freshman, was going to drop out of college, came into Flashpoint. They've now raised close to $5 million. They have more entrepreneurs working in it in the most interesting structure I've ever seen. There are tons of money. I'm not going to go through them all, but many of them, I don't want to go too fast since I think Kurt was actually in the room. I want to make sure I pay some attention to Sidekick, CodeGuard. This is some research that came out of tech. Springbot. I'm not showing you all of them, just some. This is actually a company that came from Israel to participate in Flashpoint and has recently just closed around and is doing very well. We work with companies that aren't just first-time founders. We work with companies that have, some of them are first-time founders, a lot of them are quite serious repeat founders. Let me just give you a few highlights of the progress so far. So the first Flashpoint fund was a little bit under $1 million. We pulled it together in about 6 weeks, and it's now fully invested. We've worked with 36 teams. So this is 1, 2, 3, up to 4 people in a team. We go through these 3 cohorts. Up till now, we've been operating with these teams in groups that run for typically 4 months. We have a very specific thing we do with them for 4 months. Of these 36 teams, 25 of them, by my count, have recurring revenue. Some of them have recurring revenue that next year will be close to $10 million. 18 are venture-backed. They've raised collectively about $65 million. And that's from completely first-tier investors. And that's not just, so it's great that Tech Operators is involved, and Mosley Ventures is involved, and others in Atlanta are involved, but these are also these are companies that look like investable opportunities to first-rate investors all over the country. Investors like Kleiner and Andreessen, and Sigma, and Google Ventures, and FF Ventures out of New York. So it's it's not necessarily a predictor of their success, but it's a sense of how over just a short period of time, with the right kind of work, it makes it possible for people that basically had nothing, not even actually they started with a bad idea. I'd say that's what they started with, and then they come out with something else. Just back in the envelope, it's probably at $200 million in value that's been created through this process. So I want to tell you, what I want to tell you is anyone can do it. So, if you're sitting around thinking that it takes some wild, crazy super entrepreneur, I don't think that. I think it helps, but I think that anyone can do it. And I think you can do it whether you're an entrepreneur in a startup, or you can do it if you're in a corporation and have a need for some sort of innovation or new opportunity. And I want to share that with you because there's a secret, actually, and there's a special approach, and we can explain to you what it is. It's not so easy to do, but at least I can explain to you what it is. And we're in the business now of making it possible for people to do it and for us to share that with people. And for some people, we do it for them. So, and I wanted to stress this, I guess I really wanted to say that anybody can do it. I had it come up twice. Now I'm totally screwed, though, by the way. Okay, so let me run through very quickly, if you're interested, sort of what's at the heart of it. The first is, let me just point out how people think innovation goes, because it never goes like that. They think it goes like this. They think you have an idea for a product or a thing that has to exist in the world, and you have in the back of your head a reason that you're going to go after it, because if only you could get a grip on it and bring it into the world, this would be your office. Now, what we know is the way innovation goes is quite a different movie when you actually try to do it. And anyone who's ever tried to do it knows that. That's a lot more like this movie, in which everything gets twisted around in some way. And we think we see why that is now. In such a movie, you also have someone, in a normal innovation process, you also have someone who's charismatic and has an idea for something that ought to work. It just obviously should work, and you have a customer in mind. And that person almost always pulls together a team and finds, by force of will, a way to fund that team, and that team has chops, and they've got weapons, and they can pose, and they're diverse. The only thing is, this is not at all how the team looks. This is only how the team thinks it looks. Because this is actually how the team looks. They're all asleep, and they don't know it, but it doesn't feel like you're asleep. You're plugged in, you're all sharing a fantasy, a delusion of the demand. And the problem with this delusion is that you don't notice that you're actually in a dream. It doesn't feel like a dream. And in this delusion, you can build anything. In fact, you can build anything. The only problem is when you build things, no matter how cool they are. So they thought at one point in the movie that it would be very cool to build a roller coaster that went through Buenos Aires. I mean, not the Space Mountain version of this, but the actual Buenos Aires. And so they did it. The only thing is, here's the problem with products that you build in the dream. They're not attached to the world. They're literally not attached to the world. Like, where do you get on? It seems like a really cool idea until you stop and say, where do you get on? And who's going to do that? So this is the fundamental problem with innovation is when you go to do it, you live in this dream. And you don't notice that it's a dream because literally it's actually a pathology. I want to say that people have won the Nobel Prize for discovering this. It's actually a pathology of the human mind. And the way it shows up pathologically is we make errors, and we make errors, and we have biases. But the weird thing is they don't feel like errors. That's what makes them pathological. They don't feel like bias. They feel real. And it's where they're not real that we get really screwed up. Now, in the movie, if you remember, this little gimmick they had, the guy who was building these crazy things, I guess DiCaprio, knew that they weren't real. And the only choice he had to figure out whether or not he was in the real world building a real product or was like in the fake world building a fake product is he would basically launch. He would like spin his top. And if it ran forever, it meant it wasn't attached to reality because in the real world, things don't spin forever. Same thing happens. That's right now pretty much what we do with startups and pretty much what we do with innovation. You make them, you hope that they work, you turn them on, you spin them, and you hope that they stop spinning because if they don't stop spinning, then you've built something which isn't in the real world. So the problem at Flashpoint, the first problem at Flashpoint is how do you manage to attach innovation to reality? And the difficulty, as I'll say, is it always feels like we're attached. Like you feel like you're in this room. Well, maybe you are. But it always feels like we're attached. And I want to tell you that we're not attached. And I want to show you some ways that we figured out that we're not attached. By the way, it's a picture of me when I'm dressed up at Flashpoint. My job is Buffy the Vampire Slayer because these ways that people aren't attached are ways that they don't notice. And by the way, once they become detached, even if you show them that they're detached, they can't stay attached. So in this case, here's something we get wrong. We think people want things. How do I know? Well, you say it all the time. Why? Who's that for? It's for people who want it. Well, we're going to give it to our customers. Why? Because they need it. We think people want things. We think people need things. So I'll just tell you, the research shows that's not true. I know it seems impossible to believe. I'll tell you my own example. We have a company called Dumbala, which some of you know quite well about. We started this company. I'll tell you how it started. Some professors at Georgia Tech described to me a technology that seemed like it could defeat fraud on the internet in a certain way, and I thought that was a great idea. So I ran out west and I spoke to the chief information security officer at eBay, and the conversation went something like this: "We think we can stop fraud." He said, "Nah," and I said, "Yeah, let me show you." And he said, "Wow, that's really cool." And he did a quick calculation and he said, "I think that'll save us $40 million a year." Wow, it seemed like a lot of money. And I said, he said, "How much is it?" Which I thought was a buying question. naive me, and I said, you know, $150,000. He said, okay, do you have it? I said, no, I'll go make one. So I flew back here. We put a business plan together. We raised $2.5 million and a $5 million pre with a piece of paper, put a CEO in place, built the whole thing. That was 2006. So I went back to him, by the way, and showed it to him. And 2006, we still haven't sold them. They're still not a company for Damballa. Damballa is still in existence. I think we've raised like $59 million to keep it in existence this long. And hi, Shai, nice to see you. And but the question you might ask is, well, okay, why didn't they buy? It was going to save him $40 million. By the way, I went back with it, showed it to him. He said, sure enough, it would, but he didn't buy. So the question you might ask, the question I would have asked before I went down this like rabbit hole we're in now, I would have asked myself, well, why didn't they buy? And now I'm convinced that was totally the wrong question. The right question is, whatever made me think they would buy? You see, I thought they would buy because it's rationally self-interested. It makes rational sense for them to buy. The only thing is people don't actually make their decisions that way. Let me say that again. People just don't make their decisions that way. We actually know something about that now. There's a whole field called behavioral economics, behavioral decision theory, in which it's been studied and understood how people make decisions, and they're not rational. That's not to say that after the fact it doesn't feel like they were rational. And it doesn't feel like after the fact that there was some return on investment. It just means that you can't predict what someone's going to do just because it makes rational sense. But we don't know that, and we get all screwed up about it. And if you don't control for it, you end up building things because they make sense to build, but that's not how actually people buy or make decisions. You want another one? You want to see another one? Because it's very confusing once you start to think about this. Here's a second one. Okay, if you can't rely on people to be rationally self-interested, then surely a gold standard ought to be we make them a product and show it to them, and if they want it, they'll buy it. And that's how we can tell. Well, I'm here to tell you a very weird thing. Actually, you can learn nothing about what you need to learn about, which is actual demand, by showing people a product. You say, how could that possibly be? You've heard about minimum viable products. You've heard about how could it be that you can't show someone a product and actually know anything? And the reason is products, people's reactions to products don't tell you what you need to know. And if you don't mind, I'll show you an example. So imagine, if you will, a young woman comes home from work one day. It's really been a hard week, and she walks up the front towards her house, and the door rushes open, and out from the front of the house runs this cutest little girl you ever saw. I mean, she's like really cute. And she runs up to her mother, and she says, Mommy, Mommy, I made you a mud pie, Mommy, Mommy, I made you a mud pie. And the mother looks down at her daughter and says, oh, that's the most beautiful mud pie I ever saw. That's exactly what I didn't even know I wanted that. That's exactly what I wanted. Oh, thank you so much. I see how much effort you put into it. Now, you see, the problem is that everybody in that scenario is authentic. They're saying exactly how they feel. The daughter really did work all day. The mother really didn't know she wanted it when she thought it was exactly what she wanted. But, you know, it would be a mistake, I think, for the daughter to think that there are any other mothers in the neighborhood that want mud pies. And I think it would probably be a mistake for the daughter to even think that this mother wants a mud pie tomorrow. You see, when you show somebody a product, it's a mud pie. However you're thinking about it and however they're thinking about it, whatever you're learning from that interaction, it feels like you're learning something. But I'm here to tell you the evidence is that you're not. Now, I told you the problem with this pathology is you don't notice it's a pathology. Let me tell you the third one. Third one is people walk around thinking that they have a hypothesis. They think they can, like, I have a hypothesis about what people want, or I have a hypothesis what they need. And then they go around trying to figure it out. They go have like 8 conversations with customers. The customer says, I want it. You know, I went to eBay. He definitely said he wanted it. I went to a lot of other people. They said they wanted it. And then I try to reason from examples. I say, well, you know what? 3 other things just like this are selling in the market. Therefore, this thing should sell in the market. Now, here's the thing. Even in Atlanta, we're post-enlightenment. I mean, there was a time when you thought you could figure out things about the world by just sort of making it up and talking to people and seeing what they thought. Like, do you think heavy things fall faster than light things? Sure, it makes sense. You know, 2-pound weight, 1-pound weight pulls twice as hard. Bricks, paper, brick hits first. You know, if you need to know something, you can't figure it out by doing a few examples. You can't do it by anecdotes. You can't go and have a couple of conversations with people and know anything. Although I will tell you, it is known that it's a persistent illusion, and it's understood, and there's literature about it, and you can't get yourself out of the illusion, but it's a fact. That you have a pathology that makes you think you've figured something out when you haven't. Now, here's the thing about what I've just said. I've told you 3 things. I've told you can't show people products. I've showed you can't reason from need and want because there is no such thing. And I've told you can't figure things out by having a few conversations with customers, even hundreds of them. It doesn't matter. So at this point, I think it's reasonable. By the way, I showed this presentation once to someone from Turner, and they were getting more and more upset because every slide had a picture in it that was like a property they owned until this one. So if you want to understand why there's a lot of startup failure, why there's a lot of innovation failure, I think you can unpack what I just said, and you can see the answers in there, because the tools we typically use all don't work, and they in some sense actually can't work. Now that's not to say that if you throw darts at the board to try to pick stocks that you don't make money. That's not to say that if you don't do startups and you push and you push and you push, you don't sometimes make money. You do. I'm just saying, if you want to do it reliably, I'm pointing out to you what gets in the way, and that anybody can know this, and anybody can work around it, and that's what we're working on. Okay, so here's what you actually want if you do a startup. What you actually want is sort of life. You want demand. You want a sense that you want to have a feeling that if you put this out in the world, people will draw it to them, that they will simply do what they do, which is they don't even care about it. They just pick it up and use it and buy it. That's what you want. They don't have to be excited about it. You want to be part of the world, just like life is part of the world. Well, we have a name for it. So here's the name. So the force that animates, the thing that actually draws your product or your idea or whatever your business is into the world, we call it authentic demand. Now here's what it feels like when you have it. It feels like you pick up the phone, you say 8 words in the right order to someone who's in the Fortune 5 company in Chicago, and that week they get on an airplane and fly to Atlanta to demand pricing for a product that doesn't exist. That's what we've had at Flashpoint. That's the experience that people get at Flashpoint. And it's different than saying, I think I'm going to make it, and I'm going to convince some people to use it as a beta for free for a while, and then eventually they'll get hooked on it. It's a whole different feeling. That's not how it feels. And we think it's required for success in the end. That's not required for success if your business is to like make a company and keep it going long enough until someone acquires it. If you want to do a real business, though, we think authentic demand is where it's at. So where is it? Okay, well, this is what it looks like, actually. This is the pathology of authentic demand is, here's one of the things we know. We know that people are asymmetric in their experience of gain and loss. It's just a fact. The value to you of gaining $1,000 is less than half the value to you of avoiding losing $1,000. The avoidance of loss is more than twice as important to you as gain, which means that you walk around the world all the time avoiding loss. One of the ways you avoid loss is you never discover that the world is actually ignoring you. Which I hope is not true for me at this very moment, but it's but it is true. You know, anyone's ever tried to sell, you know, you might fire the salesman, but the real reason that you fired the salesman is the world was ignoring him and your company. You don't want to know that. It's very difficult to know that. So what it feels like is false demand everywhere you look. What you see is like that customer waves and says, I want something, and I want something. You see some big swell. You feel the power of this. There's all this behavior in the world that you pick up, and you pick it up as actually false demand, and you don't notice it. So you got to get the authentic stuff. So what does the authentic stuff feel like when you feel it? And if anyone's been here and actually been in a company that has authentic demand, this is what it feels like. It feels inexorable. It feels like a vortex that pulls you in. It doesn't feel like you have a choice. You have to make them what they're telling you to make them. It's not like they're demanding something, then if you make it, they still don't want it. It just doesn't feel like that. It feels like being in love as opposed to just being in like. It has a whole different feel to it. Well, here's a natural question. Can you manufacture it? People try. The problem with trying to manufacture demand is it's not a surface phenomenon. You can go and you put a lot of power and it can feel like demand, but it's not a surface phenomenon. It comes from somewhere deep. It comes from very deep. It comes from something deeply psychological. And so you have to look for it. But looking for it turns out to be quite complicated, because when you go looking for it, you discover that you're a lot like this, my favorite cartoon character, Wile E. Coyote. You know his problem? So here's his problem. He's running around all the time, and he's wrong all the time. The only thing is he doesn't know it. And it's a borrow from a TED Talk. It's like a really good idea. So if someone were to ask you, like, what does it feel like when you're wrong? What does it feel like when you're wrong? Most people would say it feels bad, it feels crappy, whatever. So, but that's actually it's a trick question, because that's the answer to the question of what does it feel like when you discover you're wrong. The moment just before you discover you're wrong, what does it feel like? The answer is it does feel like something. It feels like being right. That's sort of the pathology. Now, if you'll allow me, now I'll start to tell you how to actually do some of the work around this. So what we've discovered is, if you do the work the normal way, that is, if you go out and, for example, talk to customers and have conversations with them, and you show them products, minimum viable products, all that stuff, it doesn't seem to work for sort of foundational reasons. But there is a way to work that turns out that has some sort of status. It has like a philosophical, mathematical, engineering status. And it's work in a place we call a negative space, and kind of you have to go there because your pathology is all to stay in the positive space. And I want to introduce you to it, but it's really a weird place. And it really takes a lot of getting used to, and it's hard to stay there. And what I mean by that is it's hard to stay there the same way it's hard to focus on this cube. So you know, you've seen this before, this cube might, as you're looking at it, pop out of the board for you. It also might be receding into the board. And if it's doing, you got it one way or the other. Now if you shake your head and defocus just a little bit, not completely under your conscious control, interestingly enough, you can make it pop the other way. You get it to go both ways? Now here's the weird thing though, you can't have it both ways at the same time. Negative space is the same way. What I'm going to show you about, I'm going to show you another way to look at the world called the negative space. You can look at the world from the point of view of the negative space, but you can't look at it from the point of view of the positive space at the same time. And you're going to keep popping back and forth with not of your own volition, but you can learn to do the work in the negative space, and that's what we found ourselves doing. And I'm going to try to hold you here for a little bit. So let me tell you a little bit about the negative space. By the way, just to give you a sense of, there is something behind this. We won an award from Georgia Tech. There's one award in the whole university for outstanding achievement in research and innovation. It was given for the work I'm showing you now. So let me tell you the first principle of negative space. I'll tell you 4 principles. The first principle of negative space is you can't rely on people to be rationally self-interested, but you can rely on people to do what they cannot not do. And all of you in the room that have had English teachers that have told you you've got to get rid of double negatives, I'm telling you they might have damaged your ability to do innovation, because there's actually a logic. There's actually a logic to this. There's actually a logic in which double negatives are not, you cannot erase them, and they actually make sense. And what I'm trying to say to you about this is you can actually come to understand people in a new way. Not that they want something, not that they need something, but you can see them for who they are so clearly that in a given situation, it would be so weird for them not to behave in a certain way that you can rely on them to behave in that way. You can literally find yourself in a place where it's possible to see a customer so clearly that in this setting, if you really got it right, it's not even really plausible, except for the fact that human beings are always doing crazy things. It's not really plausible that the human being wouldn't actually be reliable as a customer. And so the work actually at Flashpoint is almost to do the opposite of what you think. Instead of trying to find out like what people want, we figure out what they can avoid. And then, you know that picture of the ocean where there's all that demand? Here's how we find what we're looking for. We put into the world propositions like, you know what, we think that they couldn't ignore this, that they couldn't avoid this. And we go out and we find out. That's testable, it turns out. We have a lot of tools and techniques now to test that. And then you discover, you know what, you were right, they could ignore it. And guess what? Then we don't pay attention to that anymore. And in that one moment, the world gets quieter. Then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And after 4 months, roughly a third of the time, we don't know what the difference is between the ones that do it and don't. Well, for a third of the time, you end up in this weird situation where you see something so clearly that no matter how hard you try to get your customer not to buy, they insist on buying. And if you don't think it's weird to try to go up to someone who you're trying to figure out, and actually instead of doing everything in your power not to get the yes, everything in your power to get the no, because you can reliably do this, you see, because the truth is, if they can't say no, they can't say no. I know it seems obvious, but we're overcoming the pathology. So in practice, it's oddly like science. It starts with some observation about the world. You see somebody doing something, and you don't understand it. Now, what almost everybody does is they sort of make up an explanation. They're doing this because this and this and this and this. No, we don't do that. We say, if you really think that's something, then here's the way we're going to understand it. Here's our hypothesis is. If we see that right, they couldn't not do it. Then we have a prediction we make from that. We make an experiment, and then we test it. And we discover maybe they could not do it, so that wasn't right. We go around and around this loop. But the weird thing about this loop is when you do it, and you do it at the speeds that we do it, it comes out of the plane. It's twisted. It's like all of a sudden it takes you out of this waking dream that you think you know how people are operating, which you don't, even though you think you do. It takes you out of this waking dream, and all of a sudden you see people differently. Second principle of negative space. Okay, so that tells you how you go look at the world and overcome some of these biases. And by the way, these are things which we can actually do in practice, and you can talk to some of the teams about how we do it. Well, and by the way, this is where people sometimes say it sounds like Zen, because you can also tie this to what do you build. So in the positive space, you'd say, what features should we put in so that our customers will buy it? That makes sense. What do they want? That makes sense. Actually, none of those things make sense. But in the negative space, you can actually go the other way, and you can do this reliably. You can actually do the work. That's what's so interesting about this. You can say to yourself, what do we not have to do? Now, what would make us have to do something? We would have to do something if we do, because if we don't do it, they could avoid it. You know, I know it takes some practice to be able to stay in this negative space, but it's actually worth it. So we, instead of trying to figure out what we should make and what features we should put in, we figure out what features can't we afford to take out, because if we take it out, they can afford to not buy it. And so once you figure out what you have to do, find out what you do not have to do, then you just don't do that. And as odd as that sounds, you end up with product. It's unbelievably simple product. Okay, third principle of startup engineering. Customers are immune to change. So here's the weird thing. So even when you see a customer for who they are, when you really see them, and you understand who they are, and then in this setting, you can see that it would be impossible for them not to buy. They still don't buy. Now, what's that all about? So this is actually an incredibly deep subject, but it's been studied. So I have friends at Harvard and psychologists there, Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, and they figured out the following thing. And this actually started by asking, in a situation which you're probably familiar with, there's a disease, there's a heart disease. I hope it doesn't happen to you, or if it already has, sorry. you go to your cardiologist, and they say, we've done the tests, and it appears you've got this disease, and by the way, it's going to kill you. That's the bad news. The good news is we happen to have a pill. And you take this pill every day, and you make a small lifestyle change, and you'll be fine. No side effects, nothing. By the way, the pill is free. There are no side effects. Just take the pill every day, no side effects, free pill, and you'll be fine. Don't, and you die. Okay, between you and me, that sounds like a pretty damn good product. How are you going to motivate your customers better than, dead, not dead? Okay, there's no more passion you're going to get there. It's free. It's no side effects. Okay, so the evidence is 1 person in 7 is taking the pill after a year. And the reason is, what they figured out, the reason is that human beings have an immune system, a behavioral immune system, that actually causes them to not be able to change. Anyone who's ever tried to lose weight, you just ask them, could you lose weight? Sure. I can just stop eating that piece of cake, or I can go to the gym more often. It's obvious, but then 3 weeks later, you're back to where you were. And it turns out it's almost always the case that the behaviors that can't change are actually in support of some commitment that's hidden that people don't know. And it turns out you can actually map those hidden commitments and those immunities. And when you do that, you can figure out what your product is. Your product is that thing in the world that takes off the table the immunities which cause your customers to not be able to change the behaviors which otherwise get them to improvement goals. And that turns out to sort of be the answer to what you have to be. And I'll say more about that. So anyway, from this, it turns out you can almost literally calculate product. It's like you don't have to guess anymore. You can actually figure out what the purpose of each piece of your product is. It's to release a behavioral immunity. Okay, the fourth principle of startup engineering, and this is the last of the 4, it's disturbing. The teams, the startups, the innovators themselves, they're people. That means they're also immune to change. For any of you who have ever invested in a team that failed, or you look at them and say, but you see it, you're going to go do it, go make it, and they still don't, this is why. Even when you see the world for the way it is, and even when you know what you have to make, you yourself and your team can't change. And we have to address that also, otherwise the teams don't succeed. And so we found a way to create a developmental culture inside the teams that makes it possible for people to take an interest in each other's immunity to change. And it seems to make all the difference in the world. So that's it. Those are the 4 principles. We call the 4 of them together authentic innovation. And it goes like this. You see customers for who they can't avoid being. And by the way, these are people who might have never been your customer before. And then you map their immunities to change. Then you adaptively change your own mindset so you can meet them. And then you end up with what you actually wanted, which is you enable your customers to be more themselves. That's it. We're 3 months into cohort 4. This cohort we're doing a little bit differently. We have 10 startups in this cohort, and we have 4 corporate teams. This is the first time we've opened ourselves up to work with corporate teams. I'm taking it as a good sign that many of the corporate teams are here. TSYS is one of the corporations that's working with us. CAE is another corporation. Emory is also paying us to do some work with them. So I want to tell you something just interesting about Flashpoint. You might not know it. Flashpoint not only funds startups and works with them, we also accept corporate clients. You might be one. or a startup. I'll leave you with a thought about why it is and why I think this is important. And this is not in the category of scientific, but this is in the category of I believe the following picture. But I want to. If you look at the teams we've worked with, there are 36 of them. We can actually look back and have not just me doing this, other people have scored them. Some of the teams don't listen. That is, most of the teams listen, but some of the teams just, no matter what we were going to say, they were going to build what they were going to build anyway. And some of them actually participate and really get engaged. So we put them in the left and the right, and then we can organize them by which ones have stopped and which ones are growing. I think the thing on the left is what you see. I think if you just randomly invest in people that do startups, you typically see about a third of them fail, a third of them muddle around, and a third of them seem to be making some progress, but you don't know how much. That's what pretty much every venture portfolio looks like. There are significant skews among the ones that are growing. And a very small number of them return a lot, but pretty much this is how portfolios look. And I'm assuming that Glenn would interrupt me if that's not true. This is how the ones look if they actually did the work. I think that's a better picture. The green ones are the ones that have raised capital. Well, that's sort of the story, and I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.